The Melbourne docks, May of 2024. A community picket is established by Palestinian activists and Palestine activists. And the Maritime Union of Australia, the MUA, says it will respect the community picket. It lasted several heroic days as we actually delayed a ship from the shipping line Zim from being loaded and unloaded, and the MUA used the excuse of health and safety to not cross our community picket line and respect it. Then the stevedore and company, Patrick's, who we beat at exactly the same gate back in 1998, calls the Health and Safety Authority, WorkCover, and gets them to come and do a health and safety inspection. Of course, the government authority finds there is no threat to health and safety, and the MUA is given an ultimatum. You are now taking illegal industrial action, so you need to move to work. We can provide for your safety by busing the workers in past the picket line. The MUA then has to withdraw its support of the community picket line because it can't afford millions of dollars in fines under the WorkCover Act. So the question is then posed, why do unions in Australia run so scared of the law, and how can we convince them to fight for Palestine? How do we engage a union or unions that feel constrained by industrial relations law and bring about the confidence that unions need to fight in defiance of the law where necessary? To understand the position of Australian unions, we need to go back a bit. The 1980s saw a pact called the Accord between the ACTU, the Australian pet union body, and the then Labor government under Hawke and then Keating. The Accord fixed wages centrally for workers. So the ACTU would put in a wage claim, the bosses would put in another wage claim, and then a central authority would decide about what wages were worth raising or not. This actually withered the industrial muscle of Australian unions as unionism became something that was done up there between the ACTU and the Labor government. On the back of that, the Howard government comes in and passes the Workplace Relations Act, a series of anti-union laws, but Howard actually did have one stroke of genius, which that they for the first time enshrined the right to strike as legal in law, but only for a certain period during bargaining. That actually meant that he effectively recruited all of the Australian union leadership into enforcing the law. No, we can't strike because it's not legal now, we have to wait for a bargaining period. But having said that, there were always sporadic struggles here and there, and even in the 90s there was strike action under those legal provisions and semi-legal provisions on occasion. The present day situation was still under a very similar framework of laws, but industries such as nurses and now teachers, which I will speak to, are gaining some courage in relation to taking industrial action. I should also, by way of background, note the international success of union action on Palestine. So the Italian general strike in September of 2025 was actually the fifth general strike in Italy since October 2023, and it was concurrently supporting the global Samud flotilla. The dock workers who had been threatened with privatisation in Italy led the way in that struggle. And so there's a link to their own workers' struggles and Palestine already. They also then linked up with rail workers who were also threatened with privatisation in Italy. And that meant that the openly fascist Meloni government in Italy now actually sent ships to protect the global flotilla. A similar pattern in Spain, where workers' struggle and the Spanish government now regularly issues sympathetic statements in relation to Palestine. So teachers and school staff for Palestine, which is what I want to concretely speak about the experience of how we address that key question of building union confidence to fight, started simply because we made a banner. We still got the banner, and we just started flying it at rallies, and we would find people who also were teachers or school staff, were passionate about Palestine, and we started a WhatsApp group. This was very similar to the experience of other union groups who were forming Union for Palestine groups at the time. Our particular argument in the teachers group, though, is that we had to engage both with rank and file unionists to build a movement of people, but also do this in tandem with serious approaches to the union leadership while sticking to our principles in that conversation. And that was primarily to show that we are a union group, we are serious about being part of the union, but that we have an argument about the direction that the union should take. And in carrying this out, we also carried out confident public militancy in order to pull people towards militant struggle. So our principle was that our presence starts in workplaces first, and schools, of course, in particular. And we had a constant flow of initiatives that we were asking people to, that we were trying to build networks out of. Every time we put up a poster for initiative, we'd do some calling of schools, find people, spread leaflets. We had an initial forum in January of 2024 about teaching Palestine in schools. And that experience was really instructive. The Department of Education, upon seeing our publicity, immediately put out school-wide, Victoria-wide warnings to schools that teachers should be careful to remain apolitical, that we had to be neutral in the classroom. That forum was actually infiltrated by Zionists. A couple of people pretending to be teachers got up and asked questions like, how do we teach the two-state solution to preps? To which our answer was, well, you don't. And in fact, one of the speakers had a lovely story about how they had a prep morning tea where they just showed how coffee is served and cushions on the ground. This is how you teach Palestine to all sorts of ages. You need to adapt your lessons like teachers haven't already thought of that. Now, in one of the subsequent rallies that we called outside the Department of Education, a Teachers and School Staff for Palestine activist said on Channel 9 television that Hamas did what it had to do on the 7th of October. Now, in context, what he was talking about was that there is a history of resistance to occupation before the 7th of October, but he was suspended from duty with full pay. We immediately responded. 500 teachers, after we circulated a petition, immediately signed it and called for the investigation under the Code of Conduct to be called off. We did eventually get that teacher reinstated, only with a warning. And Teachers and School Staff for Palestine recruited out of this by showing that we had a bunch of people willing to stand up to the repression, which was getting very heavy from the Department of Education. We demonstrated that courage could achieve things, that it needed to be collective. This was also flowed out of one of our early decisions about the group, which was that we were going to be a union group. We weren't just going to be a bunch of activists. We insisted that people, if they wanted to join Teachers and School Staff for Palestine, had to be an AEU or IEU member, or in some cases retired, like we're not going to insist people keep their membership after they've retired. Now, a second instance, a teacher was actually sent home from her school for handing a leaflet about a Palestine rally to another teacher in the staff room with no students present. She was sent home by the principal. Now, as it turned out, the local regional meeting was that night, and so we immediately got motions put on to the agenda there, 20 people, and condemned that principal by name. And knowing her personally, let me tell you, that annoyed the crap out of her, which pleased me no end. And we demanded that the union step in officially. And again, in context, the union could easily argue the case that this was disproportionate action The person, having been stood down by the principal basically illegally, was then reinstated at work the next day and can come back in head held high. So the responses of the bosses to us just establishing a group and having one forum that we advertised was quite severe repression. We didn't always win. There's a maths teacher who is still suspended 2 years later on pay, and for teaching about Palestine in the context of a maths class. He brought in how we analyse death statistics in the context of Palestine, and for wearing a keffiyeh at work. He was unlucky enough to be photographed by a Zionist student at his work on their mobile phone, despite the mobile phone ban, which, as we all know, works. And that picture, with his face censored out, got published in the Herald Sun. And you can see there that the threat to dox and to out people who support Palestine was absolutely real. Now, one of the central things about garnering support within the workplace is holding workplace meetings where you pass motions in relation to Palestine. In other words, we needed to do the groundwork at each workplace of convincing our workmates that Palestine is a union issue. So it could be calling for solidarity with repression of activists, as I've already outlined, or calling for teacher independence so that teaching is not censored in the classroom by demands to be neutral, which, by the way, really sound ridiculous, especially to global politics teachers, where like literally it's our job to teach this stuff. The other things, and we'd argue these on some good principles. Union rights are human rights. Palestine rights are human rights. We're literally part of an organisation as a union that advocates for human rights. Repression of Palestinian voices is actually repression of all voices of resistance within the school system. We also argued that the treatment of Palestinian students, keffiyehs being removed from students, Palestinian flags being ripped down from notice boards, this is actually racism. And we also connected with people's general horror at the genocide. So I know that it would be a common experience in this room that 2024 was a year when our social media feed was just filled with burning children and smoking ruins. We also, crucially, got workplaces to endorse the rallies on particular Sundays and got workplaces to bring their sub-branch banner along to the protests. Now, that was a very concrete, simple thing, but again, it had to be argued politically. People were afraid, well, is it really a political issue, our banner, the school name on it, appearing at protests? And so we had to work through those arguments carefully at the workplace. But it did mean, on occasions, that Palestinian activists for Palestine, I should say, found that the sub-branch didn't have a banner or didn't have a proper sub-branch structure set up. So activists using Palestine as a vehicle were actually the ones who were setting up sub-branches and banners and getting us set up for struggle. I have to say, I invited him, but he's not here, but the delegate bill at Spenceley Street Primary, they brought their banner to every single Sunday rally. I absolutely cannot admire him too much. This was, of course, then that meant good for union organisation to be active around Palestine. The next stage was taking workplace motions to regions. I mean, we really did this in tandem. So regions are where workplaces in a district get together to network, basically. In the AEU, they're very much run top-down, where officials come and speak and answer questions. But if you've got left-wingers, like me and other comrades who've managed to get themselves on regional executives, they're actually run a bit more openly with motions entertained and more discussions. So we could then spread the word as we networked with different workplaces. And I got some pleasant surprises when some rather conservative workplaces eventually, after a year's work, started passing those motions and themselves bringing them to regions. We also concretely focused on issues that teachers are in a social position to have a say about. So particularly militarism in schools and Anzac Day. We published Anzac Day materials that publicised things that aren't generally taught in schools about Anzac Day.
Your attention, please.
Things like the Saw Fens massacre. No one ever actually talks in schools about how Anzac soldiers went and massacred a bunch of people in Palestine. And also pointing out that, after all, Anzac Day is about celebrating the invasion of another country and the politics of that. So teachers have social weight when what we say actually matters to the wider community and society, and that's in addition to our weight as being unionists and organised unionists. We actually won a campaign to get arms dealers out of school programs. So by way of background, companies like BAE and hang on, I've got another couple of names here. BAE and Albert Systems actually fund STEM programs. So you can imagine a tired science coordinator sees a really cheap for what you get quality science program full of kits and labs and fascinating things for students to build, but it's all focused on producing students who'll go into engineering at schools to help design weapons, is the ultimate goal. And so we made a demand, arms companies should not be sponsoring school programs in schools. And the restrictions, there are actually a few companies that are not allowed to be involved, tobacco, alcohol, gambling and firearms, right? So we got the firearms one extended to be arms companies. That was a result of workplace motions, campaigning on the ground, getting onto the science coordinators, getting them to check whose sport programs they had, seeing if they were on the bans list, and so on. We also didn't shy away from militant confrontation. So we chased down the education minister. There's still some great clips up of one of our comrades yelling at the minister, calling shame on him for his basic support for genocide and the deaths of children in schools. Now, this culminated in July 2024 when at the annual AEU branch conference, we actually got a motion up supporting Palestine, and that being the sovereign body of the AEU means that the AEU's official position is support for Palestine. That actually came about because the officials came to us when we put a motion onto the floor and they wanted to negotiate. And although a few of us grumbled about the AEU leadership taking credit, at the time it's like, no, this is good, right? The AEU leadership then were arguing in favour of the motion. That meant we had to compromise on some of the wording, but it also gave licence to activists to wear keffiyehs at work. We were no longer going to be picked on for teaching Palestine in our classroom, where appropriate, says the motion. It's always appropriate, that's the secret. And that meant that through seriously negotiating through Justin Mullally, we got a great motion up on the floor that was the key. I think our crowning achievement was in August of 2025, where using that endorsement, we built a big AEU contingent to one of the Sunday Palestine rallies. It was one that the Victoria Trades Hall rallied. Now, this was done mostly through mobilising through our extensive networks, but we started cold calling some schools, finding out who the delegate was, seeing if they could get a banner to the rally. We had about 200 to 250 teachers from about 30 different schools there, with about a dozen sub-branch banners. The AEU leadership did publicise it by bearing it at like item number 8 in one of their weekly bulletins. The two of the leaders, Mullally and D'Ortenzio, did come. They stayed well away from the AEU contingent on the day. I went up to them and had a chat. I couldn't convince them to come and join the rally. No, we're right here. We're meeting other members here, they said somewhere. So just a quick conclusion. the key ingredients of this approach, number one, is building relationships and building activities by building relationships and building relationships through having a constant stream of activities and things that we're actually doing. Whether it's a forum, a workshop, a protest, a contingent, educational materials, endorsements for actions, and so on. Also being welcome to a wide range of union members who agree on reasonable minimums. No to the genocide in Palestine, Palestine should be free. Being in a union group, our collective strength is our strength. And sober assessments of what we're doing and where we were at in regular meetings. Criticism in the TSS4P never escalated to personal tensions, I'm very proud to say. And it really is a safe group to raise issues and disagreements. And finally, we did use the unique position of teachers of our industry and our social position, as I've mentioned. I mean, there are comrades here who are involved in various industries as union delegates who have key positions in society that have something unique to say about Palestine. The very last thing I'll say is teachers and school staff for Palestine led directly to a rank and file group, Fight the Crisis, fighting and contesting the last AEU elections, who are now the group, I think, I mean there are various left groups, but I think Fight the Crisis is leading the way to make the AEU a fighting union. So, thank you.